It is good to be here with the Heart Change You live stream. Hopefully you'll join us. You'll throw in some questions or comments. We love the chance to interact with you. Today we're talking about the topic of anxiety. Not that anybody ever gets anxious, so that's not a common topic. It's kind of interesting. We're actually doing a one-day retreat. We're calling it Better in One Day, Overcoming Anxiety, and that's coming this Saturday, and we're getting a great response. But hey, before I get ahead of myself, Kimberly, it's great to have you today.
I've never felt anxiety.
You've never felt anxiety? Well, then
I can't tell a lie. Yes, I have.
I was going to say, well, then you might as well go on. You won't be any help today.
Yeah.
But and of course, Matthew in studio. And
Hello.
we have Heather from remote location, hiding out. Yes, she is. So it's good to have each of you with us today, joining us. Hey, over the weekend, we hit 600 subscribers.
Wow, really?
Which
That's
means that
awesome.
I didn't track. I really didn't pay that much attention, but I think we doubled last year, I believe.
That's amazing.
And it'd be neat to turn around, double again in the next year. So
I'd love
that's
that.
pretty cool. So you can help us out by subscribing and or hitting the notification bell, passing it on to others. You know, one thought too, I was actually visiting with Heather about, it's like we have so much on the site anymore. It's like we almost need to do a video just to explain what all we got on the site. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. But welcome.
Well, that's not anything to be anxious about anyway. Well, I probably would begin by saying that if anybody's listened to me on this program before, I mean, I've come from a background of living with anxiety. I mean, and that's a horrific thing to think about. Fear, anxiety, all those things, stress. But by the grace of God, He's helped me with it. And I literally went through years and years and years of that. And what I love is when the Word of God and we get together like this and share things that can help each other, that it literally transforms you and changes. And I can really remember the day when I had felt all that stuff for so many years, and I realized and thanked God, oh, it's been 6 months since I felt that way. You know, when it was a daily thing. And so once I recognized that God was working and helping me with it, I thanked Him and praised Him for it. And then after that, it was, oh, it's been 9 months. Oh, it's been a year. Now, can I say that it never pops up occasionally still? It does. But acknowledging God is at work and has done a work in me is a wonderful thing. And so I'm very thankful for the Word of God and for people like you and Heather and other people that have sown into my life for years, you know, and helped me in that way. So
when you describe that, this is me backpedaling because I've struggled with levels of anxiety all of my life. And a lot of times people they look at me and say, well, you come across so confident, etc. So I'm not talking I don't know that we're on the same page here, the same language. I'm talking more of a low-grade, constant anxiety. When I hear you describe what you're talking about an overwhelming, debilitating anxiety.
exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And so I would assume, don't want to assume wrongly, but you still, when you say, I'm not feeling that, you're not feeling the overpowering stuff, I would assume you still have some insecurity, low-grade anxiety issues or not. Is it all gone? You can think about that. If
I'm going to think about that for a minute because I think probably if I do, being honest, it's when it comes to maybe not measuring up to what people think I should be like. I think that's the one that pops into my mind the most. And so that's probably what causes it.
Well, Heather, you pointed us in a direction. What do you have for us today?
Yeah, so I was
I was so inspired, really, honestly. I couldn't think about anything else because we've been preparing for this 1 day retreat. We've also got a new course on heartchangeu.com about overcoming anxiety. So I've been really diving into this topic for the last couple of weeks, reading things that you've written, watching videos, watching blog posts that we've done for over the past several years, um, watching all kinds of things. And the topic has resonated with me at such a deep level. It's because it is your teachings on it have reframed it in my mind. Like for me, anxiety was kind of this, especially the kind of chronic anxiety that Kimberly was describing, has sort of seemed like a phenomenon, like it had like this mystical, it's just something you have, like you have diabetes, or you have, like almost like a diagnosis or a sentence that there's not much you can do about. But Pastor, the way that you have framed it in these materials that we're doing for this retreat, and also the classes that we have online, connecting it with our gifts from God, as being visionaries, as him giving us the ability to see into the future, because and kind of plan for the future, and think about possibilities and get excited, and connecting that with hope, which I think is probably why he gave us that gift. Mine always shows up still today as worry. I worry, will I be able to provide for my family? Will I be able to provide for myself? Sometimes if I really let that chase that rabbit down the trail, I'll be worrying about, what am I going to do when I retire? And what if something horrible happens to my kids? If I allow my brain to go there, I will get myself in all kinds of anxiety, and it can debilitate me, paralyze me. So reframing it, to help understand where it comes from, that it comes from the ability to visualize or have hope for the future, and from that a faith in the future, because over and over again there's like this fine line, it seems like, where Jesus tells us, do not be anxious, do not worry. Don't worry about tomorrow. Why are you worried about tomorrow? You can't add anything to your life by worrying about tomorrow. So he tells us that, but at the same time, we've been given this gift of hope. He is our hope, and the ability to kind of visualize or hope for our future in this world, not only in the world to come. So it's been really kind of comforting to me, because it did seem like it was something I was just kind of plagued with, and I shouldn't be feeling this way because I'm a Christian. Jesus, all throughout the Bible, not just in the Gospels, tells us not to worry, do not be anxious, cast your burdens upon him, all these things. Why am I feeling this way? So I really appreciate, Pastor, your reframing of it. Like that really helped to give me, even before we even get into healing it, praying over it, all those kind of things, just seeing it from that perspective has been very helpful.
Well, going back to what Kimberly was talking about, I don't know that you need to make this differentiation, but there's that debilitating anxiety. And then there's that, I'm going to call it a much more low-level anxiety. Actually, the way I frame anxiety is this. Anxiety is me looking inward. And as I'm looking inward, I have a fear that I won't be enough, that I won't have what it takes, I'm not sufficient, I'm not capable. I would suggest all of us have that initial low-level anxiety that is just there 24/7, and if we're not handing that off to Christ the way we should be, it's going to be there. At least I struggle with that. So when you described what you did, I was like, okay, well, that's different. But then I also talk about a whole different topic, and that's, again, I use the term spiritually sensitives. There are people who are very open to the spirit realm, where now we're not talking about me turning it inward on me and fearing for the future. It's like it's this overpowering connection with a spirit of fear or whatever you want to call it, where it just overwhelms you and you're literally not even capable of saying hello today.
That's exactly right. Well, and I think I've talked about that in previous shows where it got to the point where I couldn't even go to the store or anything because it just overtook. And so I think what you're saying is really crucial because even when I read your notes a little bit, I was like, oh, I can look at anxiety in a different way, like what Heather is saying. And I think even to begin with, anxiety caused me to be afraid. Mm-hmm. So why not do the steps or the things at that level of anxiety before it gets to that debilitating place where you can't do anything and then you're fearful. And so I think God really did have a plan with telling us the importance of anxiety. And why would he mention it in his word? Why would he say, be anxious for nothing, but in all things with prayer and supplication, give thanks to God. Give thanks to God. I think that was one of the things when I read that scripture, when I was feeling anxious once, I kind of broke it down and I was like, with thanks to God, and that just was highlighted to me. And so once I started thanking God, it kind of took that anxiety and the fear of my future away. And like Heather was saying, that hope then arrived, hope showed up and I loved it. And I thought, whoa, I feel something here different than I had before. Mm-hmm. So
what's interesting, anxiety is me turning inward on me. It's me asking the question, do I have enough? Will I be enough? Oh no, I'm looking in the future and maybe I was okay today, but can I do that again tomorrow? And so a lot of times it's very me-centered. Now, obviously, anxiety, as I talked about, spiritually sensitives, you can begin to, I call it borrow anxiety from all kinds of directions. You can walk in a room and if someone else is anxious, you're instantly anxious. And so you've got those. But let's go to that verse that you're talking about, Philippians 4:6. Be anxious for nothing. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yes.
So when I'm talking the low grade anxiety that I feel, all right, yes, need to do that. But in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. You referred to this. It's interesting that really what transforms the anxiety starts with that surrender process, the prayer and the supplication. Let's just go back to the very definition, the root. If anxiety is me worried about me not being enough, guess how I get around that? I understand that in a fallen world, let's go there, you're going to lose. Hate to be that guy, but we're under the law of sin and death. No, you won't be enough. I mean, that's really where it starts, and surrendering to realize that apart from God, I go to John 15:5, I can do nothing. Apart from God, let's rephrase it, apart from God, I won't be enough. I won't be able to reach around. I won't be able to be the godly mother, father, brother, sister, child, influencer that God's created me to be.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, Pastor, I appreciate just that level of getting real as well. That helps to demystify it too, right? So conventional wisdom, at least in the world we've been living in for the last 20 years, whether it's psychotherapy or self-help, or even some churches, it's all about me and what I can do and you got this and all this kind of stuff. And that for me gives me more anxiety because my experience time and again has shown me I don't got this. My experience time and again shows me I get myself in over my head and I set my sights higher than I can possibly reach on my own. Of myself, I can't, and that makes the word all that more powerful when when it was brought to me, when the gospel was brought to me and I read, apart from me you can do nothing. And I'm like, wow. I mean, like I said, it flies in the face of worldly wisdom, because who wants to be told you can't do anything? You're nothing without Christ. But there is a comfort when surrender comes in, and I look honestly at my experience and go, oh, so I can't, and I don't have to, because he promises that he will never leave me. He will never forsake me. He is always there. So that prayer and supplication is turning my thoughts into a totally different direction than what every other method of trying to fix my problem has been, which is I need to try harder. I need to do something more. To the supplication, Lord, help me. Thank you for helping me. Thank you. The thanksgiving with it. Thank you, Lord, for everything you've already brought me through. And because of that, I have hope that you'll bring me through more. I mean, it's such a flip, and it's such a beautiful flip. So thank you for bringing that.
Many times people, churches, a lot of us skip from Philippians 4:6, be anxious for nothing, to 4:13, but we don't do the entire verse. We just do the first half of the verse. I can do all things. Yeah. We forget the through Christ, or in Christ, through Christ who strengthens me. We forget that. So then instead of us working towards that formula that helps us let go of the anxiety, which is, it actually starts at, no, I am insufficient. I can't do this. And to me, that's doubled down on with the Thanksgiving part that you brought up. With Thanksgiving. Why do I need the Thanksgiving? Because I can't do this on my own. I'm not sufficient of myself. God never created me to do that. And a lot of times people think, well, that's just because of the fall. No. In the beginning, God and Adam were like close. I mean, they were one, they were tight. And I believe that the energizing of God was pouring out on Adam every day, renewing him, re-strengthening him, building him up. So that's the normal way we're created. Well, if I'm going to live apart from God, I virtually guarantee I'm going to fall short. And when I see that, if I don't understand these things that I'm laying out, when I see that, I'm going to struggle with what's wrong with me.
And also, on another note in that direction, the thing that really changed life for me in Christ and the hope also is that Thanksgiving, first realizing what you said. If you're all self-centered and looking at yourself and realizing I can't do it, and it then began to lead me, once I started thanking him, it led me into not even recognizing what I couldn't do anymore, but I began thanking him and acknowledging him for who he is, not who I am. Mm-hmm. Because without him, we could do nothing, like what you're talking about. And so it was more about acknowledging God first, his abilities, his ways of doing things are far greater than mine. And so when we do things according to his plan, his purpose, thanking him for being God, for who he is, and not looking at myself and patting myself on the back and going, and I think that's one of the ways, believe it or not, maybe that's a positive thing with anxiety, is there's a hidden little purpose in it to get God involved, and so that he gets the glory, because he wants the glory. And otherwise, maybe we'd glory in ourselves and not really realize who did it, the one.
Well, we have a comment from a listener where he talks about be anxious for nothing. And then he said, I see what I've got to get done, got to take care of, and no way to get it. So, yeah, I'm anxious. Now what? And Now what? God's peace. God's got peace for me. Okay, that doesn't pay my bills, and I actually I like that. I like that where it gets real. Of it doesn't pay my bills. Now, what I would go back to, and I talk about the spirit realm as a multiplier, and God doesn't go where we don't go, and etc. If the spirit realm is a multiplier, we're not laying this out in a way that you do nothing. There is a piece that we play. And so when we read the verse, John 15:5, apart from me, Jesus said, you can do nothing. But I'm actually going to turn around, and this is what I believe in theology, apart from partnership. We talk about that a lot. God will generally do nothing. I mean, I'm not saying God can't do whatever God's going to do. But when it comes to people, if you don't answer the door, if you don't speak the words, if you don't take some steps. So the comment that he made of God's not going to pay the bills, it's interesting. In Deuteronomy 8, what does the scripture says? It doesn't say God gives us wealth. It says he gives us the power to get wealth. Now, let's back that one down a step. If you take a look at that, God gives us the power to get wealth. Let's bring anxiety into the picture. If I have anxiety in the picture, that's going to block my ability to hear from God. That's going to block my confidence to take the next step. I'm going to end up not doing what I need to do. Or, how about this? I'm doing a program like this. I'm full of anxiety. I'm trying to convince you that I know what I'm talking about. All of the anxiety that's just covering me, you're going to look at me and you're going to laugh at me. You're not going to listen to me. You're going to like, who is this guy? When we walk in anxiety, it has real life outcomes. And a lot of times those real life outcomes kill off Deuteronomy chapter 8 to where God will speak to us, where God will give us ideas, God will encourage us to step out and to take steps. And lo and behold, I end up over here in a reality where my bills aren't getting paid. Of course I'm anxious. Well, maybe if we were able to quiet the anxiety down long enough to hear from God and obey God, maybe my bills would get paid. Just a thought.
I like it.
Yeah, biblical spirituality, this morning during class, Pastor, you were comparing the Christian walk to the New Age, which is where I came from. So, was delivered from. That's really what I need to say. And in that way of thinking, it is very magical. It is very like you're just going to align with your good. Just keep your vibration up and you will just align with goodness and prosperity will flow to you. And all of these things are going to happen. And it can be intoxicating, literally, like you get drunk on it. Paul writes in one of his letters about being drunk and being blind and being asleep when you're in this magical theology kind of way of thinking. So there is a practicality, and I think I know that's biblical as we look at, especially in the Old Testament, as we look at the way people were instructed by God to live. Just Moses, for example, he tells Moses, I've got a job for you. You are going to be the spokesperson. And Moses is instantly gripped with what I think is anxiety. He's like, I can't do that. I can't speak. I'm slow of speech. How can I do that? And he says, don't worry. I got you. I'm going to be speaking through you. And by the way, here's a brother to help you. And oh, by the way, when I send you to Pharaoh, I'm giving you a staff. So he gives him a physical tool to do the job that he has given him to do. He also brings people alongside him to help him in it. And so it is it really is a stronger, more solid. You talk about solid faith a lot in this writing about anxiety. It is a more solid faith because he equips us to physically go out there and make money, to physically go out there and provide. He, not only does he give us the wisdom and the vision like we were talking about, but he keeps our body strong and trains us to be able to do those things. So yeah, I appreciate Stu's comment because it can seem like one way or the other, not necessarily going all the way over into the New Age where I was, where it's just this magical provision that's coming from the sky. But also not kind of I think it was during last week's live stream, I was talking about Moses up on the mountain and Joshua on the bottom. I've got to be in both places at once. I'm in prayer and supplication because he's equipping me to be. So I'm Moses and I'm Joshua. I'm fighting at the same time on the ground, in the battlefield, in the world.
What's interesting in that, that's a major topic that we actually cover in the retreat. If your spirituality, if the version that you have isn't showing up in real life, you will struggle with anxiety. At some point, I'm not going to develop a solid faith if I'm not connecting with God. My presence isn't changing. I'm not obeying God. I'm not getting some God outcomes. That's one of the real causes of anxiety, where I've got this faith place over here where it's like, who's going to pay the bills? Nobody's going to pay the bills. I have to pay the bills. If I'm living in that zone, then I start in anxiety. If I start in anxiety, all of the things, Deuteronomy 8:18 that I talked about, given the power to get wealth, etc., none of that is happening from God. Then I go back to Philippians 4:6, with thanksgiving. There's nothing to give thanks for. Why would I give thanks to a God who doesn't intervene and doesn't help me? And yesterday was terrible. The day before that was even more terrible. And today's terrible. And I'm supposed to trust God. I'm supposed to walk through this. And really, I go back to this a lot in our culture. We've lost faith in a God who intervenes. We haven't totally lost faith in God yet. That's happening rapidly. But we've really, as a culture, have lost faith in a God who intervenes. So it's almost like I come up, I lay hands on you and pray for you, be warmed and be fed, and I walk on, and I don't expect anything to happen, and you don't expect anything to happen, but we prayed, so it was nice. At some point, we've got to begin to exercise a much more reality-based faith where, oh, wow, I walked this process through a year ago, and look at what God did. I walked it through 6 months ago, and look at what God did. Now I am more able to walk through my anxiety today.
Well, and his question also, it makes me think of growing up. My dad, for years and years and years, I can't remember a time where I didn't hear him and my mother talking at the dining room table about, we can't pay our bills, we don't have any money. He'd go out and take on every odd job he could. He wore himself out. Just doing whatever he thought he needed to do. And I never did really see a result of him not worrying or being anxious about how he was going to provide for our family. And it was a constant in my life. And so one of the things that changed me as far as anxiety about money and how I was going to be taken care of, because that kind of was an anxiety I had as an adult woman. Well, how am I going to be taken care of? And so one of the things, as Heather was talking about wisdom, that stood out to me is in Proverbs. There's a proverb in 4, and it's talking about a father's instruction. And I never got any instruction from my father on money at all. And so I was always worried about it.
Actually, let me
go ahead.
intervene. Yes, you did. You've just been describing it. You were instructed to worry. Okay,
yes,
never mind.
There you go. That is still an instruction. I love that. And so this is in Proverbs 4, and it starts, it looks like I've got it at, is that 7? Let's start at 6. Stick with wisdom, and she, which she is just a term for wisdom, will stick to you, protecting you throughout your days. She will rescue all those who passionately listen to her voice. And so when I've read that, I thought, oh, I need to listen to wisdom's voice in finances, not the voice of what my earthly father had said. Wisdom is the most valuable commodity, so buy it. Revelation knowledge is what you need, so invest in it. And so when I first read that years ago, I was like, Oh, I had prayed for help, for provision financially, but I had never really bought the wisdom of God, sought the wisdom of God in how I could provide or how the job, the whatever it is, I had my own idea.
It's interesting. As a pastor, I've run some fairly major organizations, a lot of dollars. And as a pastor, I came to a worldview of money being more symptomatic. In other words, what I saw consistently as a church and as a ministry, what I saw was that if we were in obedience, if we were doing what we were supposed to be doing, the finances would be there. And they might be plentiful, they might be scarce. Again, Philippians right before 4:13, he says, I know how to be abased and I know how to abound. So you know what? We're all going to be subject to those seasons where, hey, had rain, had a good harvest, it's plentiful, we can bless other people. Ooh, it's very scarce right now. We're kind of hanging on, we're crying out to God. There's some humility going on here. So I know how to be abased, I know how to abound. But I saw this in the scriptures with David when the drought lasted too long. It was like, whoa. Droughts come and go. Dry seasons come and go. But something's wrong here. And of course, they prayed and there was a curse over the land and they sought that out. And I've found that with finances, that much of the time, if I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, things generally take care of themselves. I don't worry about it too much. When I start hitting a roadblock, it's like, all right, what's going on? This is a message. This is a symptom of something at a spiritual level that isn't where it's supposed to be.
So
And
Stu
I'm glad-
has a good question on this that
Okay.
fits in with that, but I'll go ahead and read it, Pastor, since I know it might be a little hard to read on the TV there. But Stu says, if I'm not where God wants me, does that mean I'm having a hard time? Well, what about just struggling because I'm not of this world? Sometimes I think that's why I get worried. Life isn't easy. I can get peace with Jesus, but Jesus said there would be trouble. So that kind of fits in with what you were just talking about. So how do you rectify that where Jesus did say there would be trouble, and that can mean money too?
Well, first of all, you pray. And frankly, this last fall was incredibly difficult for me. I'm not sure why. I mean, even to this day, there's times when I'm like, am I deluding myself? Did I really hear from God? But what I sense and what I still believe is that part of it's this program, part of it's things like that. As we become more public, more visible, there's more warfare, there's more stuff coming against us on a regular basis. And so there was a warfare, there was a difficulty that came through being obedient to God. So there's times when you're being obedient, you're actually doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Every time this ministry has been at a point of stepping out and expanding and going to the next level, literally every time we have bottomed out in terms of giving, we have hit a point of struggle, and there was a test of faith, so to speak, to where it was kind of like, wow. I mean, I can remember one time it was kind of like the Women's Center was just done, and all of a sudden we hit a dry stretch in terms of giving, and it was like, okay, God, did you raise this up just for it to go ahead and close down? And I can remember when I was going through that, it's like, well, God, it's your ministry. I guess you brought it this far if that's what you want. And walking through that surrender process during that period of time was huge. And in both of those cases that I'm talking about here, I don't look back and go, wow, you were doing something wrong. You were in sin. You needed to adjust. You weren't hearing from God. It's just kind of like, that's just kind of what happens. A lot of times God tests, he tests your commitment. He tests your surrender. He tests your dependence. Why? Because in the testing, it confirms it. It strengthens it. It makes it more. So those are two examples where I wasn't necessarily doing something wrong. We weren't necessarily doing something wrong. I've also had other situations when the lean period came along, God very specifically said, you're not obeying. The organization's not obeying. The organization is not where it needs to be. This needs to be cleaned up. There's sin in the camp, whatever. So I guess I would go back to that to Stu and say there's not a simple answer to that. I've seen it both ways where, life is tough sometimes, and suck it up, get going, get after it.
Think of Job sitting there, and all his brothers are around him and saying, "What have you done? What have you done that this has happened to you?" And it really was Satan getting permission from God to do everything except kill him. And Job come out on the other side of it. Wow. So I understand what you're saying about that. And God's always wanting to draw us closer to him in every circumstance. And so I've kind of had to learn that where I'm at is where I'm at, and God is with me, and God's for me, not against me, and trying to draw me more into an intimate, close relationship with him. And maybe, well, I do know this was true. I think I had too close of a relationship with money for many, many years, closer to me than God. And I thought God was more valuable than my relationship with him, or money was more valuable than the relationship with him. And so I think that scripture that I read really hones in on me because, hey, I can get wisdom from God. Guess what? It's free. But he also says, go buy it. And I can attest that for years I just bought and bought and bought and bought. And guess what? I fought and fought and fought and fought until I surrendered my money to God. It belongs to him. God is the one who has given us the ability, like you said, to make money. And so I think acknowledging where it comes from, and that actually every bit of money that I have belongs to him. It does not belong to me. And giving him that first tithe, knowing that it's him, that's just acknowledging the truth that God gave it to me. God did it. And so I think, and not saying this viewer has that I'm speaking from my own experience and heart, that God had to change my heart in that place of finances and money and making it greater than him.
You can only be hurt by what you care about. You can only be anxious about those kinds of things that are a high value in your world. I can go back, let's go another layer of depth here. I grew up, again, children of Depression era parents and aunts and uncles. And again, just a lot of influence there. Plus, I also grew up with a strong servant mentality. So as I'm walking into ministries, there was just a sense of I'm not worthy. Well, that's another one that I'll just, everywhere I go, everything that just comes out of my being is, well, I'm not worthy. And, we have arguments around the ministry from time to time of, it's like, no, this book is worth something, charge something for it, and I'm kind of like, no, not here. Let me just give it away, et cetera. And so that, I'm going to call it poverty mentality, also is huge. There's a whole lot of people out there, if you let them walk on you, they will walk on you. And so that's another whole layer of stuff where what's going on inside of me spiritually, my message that I'm giving off, the lifestyle that I'm choosing, all of that, now that begins to impact my ability to pay bills. And it'd be one thing if it was me, but now it's affecting my family. Now it's affecting the entire ministry. So that's just, again, there's layers upon layers here. But when I get this stuff fully submitted to God, and I'm going to go back to the verse you brought up, Philippians 4:6, with thanksgiving.
Yes.
When I really began, and back to the Women's Center and what I talked about there, when all of a sudden, it dried up and we weren't sure how we were going to pay our bills and it was looking really ugly. And I went back through the surrender process. And after a full surrender process and walking that through, then it's like the windows of heaven opened up and we were more blessed than we'd ever been. And it was just like the with thanksgiving got triggered at a level that was just amazing in me. And you can't really get rid of anxiety until you start seeing God as provider. God is the one who's going to give you the grace and he's pouring into you. now that just changes everything about the anxiety.
So I have a question. So I'm thinking about what you've written in the materials about anxiety being a result of vision, right? Of the vision that God has given us, and fear comes along with that. What if I can't measure up? Definitely won't measure up, at least to the way I think it's supposed to go. Um, and then that anxiety starts to build. So what I've been thinking about all morning is, what is the proper place for that gift of vision? Because he gives it to all of us. How do I use it appropriately? Because I almost feel like if I'm not using it, the need to use it builds up, and my mind will start to use it somewhere it doesn't need to go. Does that make sense? Because my vision and my focus needs to go where he wants it.
We try to do things as simply as possible just because I'm too complex too much of the time. I have a one-word answer for you: partnership. I mean, the reality is that God has called us to use our gifts. You will not feel a sense of purpose. You will not feel a sense of fulfillment. You'll struggle. Again, I don't know that this is true, but the question that we had, a lot of times people who are called and gifted in that area of provision, they're supposed to be a helper of other people. Well, then they struggle in that area because, okay, where we're strong, we tend to take it and run with it. And so if I'm able to lay that down, then I'm able to invite God into that area. And back to what I said, God, you told me to go here. We agreed. We prayed as a board. We did this as a ministry in agreement because we believed it was you. And so, God, I hand it off to you. You go through that surrender process. That surrender process then allows you to hear from God, allows you to be led by God. And I'll guarantee if you're hearing from God and being led by God, and let me throw one more in His time, that's one I have messed up more times than I don't even want to try to count, where I try to push ahead of God. And God, you spoke this, and I'm running really fast, and you're not keeping up with me. I mean, so in His time, then you're going to see the partnership. You're going to see the empowering. You're going to see the provision. And if you're seeing all of that, now my reality changes. When my reality changes, hopefully I notice and I give thanks. We're back to that again. And that reality basis is so important. And yes, the thing you care about the most is who God created you to be and called you to be. So for some people, if they're in the area of provision, the money piece is going to be huge. For the next person, it's like, who cares about that? God will take care of it. And they don't really pay attention. So that partnership, which is what you care about, your anxiety is going to tend to be especially in the area of your gifts and calling, because that's where you really feel like you fall short. If I fall short in these areas over here, if I fall short in the kitchen, I don't get too anxious about it. Okay, I mean, my kids joke that, they had to learn. My wife worked evenings, and so I got to care for the kids a lot in the growing up years. And my kids joke that they had to learn to cook early, otherwise they would have died an early death from hamburger helper. So if I fall short in the kitchen, it doesn't destroy my world. What destroys your world, what makes you anxious, is typically in the areas of where you feel called and you feel a sense of responsibility.
I like that. That does make sense.
So,
and it seems most difficult to me, and I have an example that, the training cases that God gave me a vision to do 4 years ago. So I knew it, I saw it, I wrote it down on a paper, I knew, and I thanked Him right then for it, because I knew it came from God. But I didn't sense this urgency, and I knew, God's plan was He had some work to do in me before that was going to take place. And if I'd have went ahead and jumped in there, it would have been a disaster. And so it almost got to such a long length of time that I had forgotten about it even. And then, I'm praying and all of a sudden I heard, it's time. And it was so clear to me. And I went, time for what? Training cases. Now. Don't wait. And so it was just bizarre. And so I just said, okay, I'm doing it. It's now. And then he gave me the steps, who to go talk to, it was just so clear. And so I know that timing is big, and I've made a lot of mistakes with timing.
And that is huge, because if you jump out there, you fall flat on your face. What happens to your reality? Your reality crashes. So then I don't have faith anymore. And so then my anxiety is up. The reason God gives you that, I call it first fruits. He gives you a vision before it's time. In the Bible, they would bring the first fruits. They would bring the green heads. They would, it's not quite time for harvest. Having been a farmer, it's always kind of fun. At wheat harvest, you see all these farmers out there in their fields plucking heads and chewing on the grain and kind of like, nope, not quite ready yet, and so you get that. And so those heads that you pick early on and you chew on the grains, it's like it gives you a vision for what's coming. And because of the vision, again, I'll take it back, you run right home. It's close, so you run home and you check that combine and you make sure that everything's in order. That early vision is given exactly for that reason. It's given because he knows we have a preparation season. And without the preparation season, then the vision will be absolutely worthless. So he has to give us that. And a lot of times we don't pay attention to that timing. We run ahead of that. We fall flat on our face. There's no empowering of God. There's nothing of what God wants to do or how he wants to do it. And then we're angry at God and we're ready to just tear the whole thing up and throw it all out because none of it was God. And God, if that's the way you're going to treat me. And so we go through our little temper tantrum period, and wow, that all works really well for us. And in the meantime, almost all the time, the whole time you're going through that, anxiety.
And I think one of the things, that was probably one of my first experiences in God showing me to do something, and I wasn't anxious about it. And the reason why I know I wasn't anxious is when he told me about it, I didn't think about it or worry about it again. And I remember saying, well, okay, God, then it's your business, it's your project, it's you, not me.
What you're saying, and this is powerful, it sounds like you knew you could not pull it off.
I couldn't.
And that's neat. A lot of times God asks us to do things that are so totally beyond us that we know we can't pull it off. And when that's the way it is, we kind of put it down. We walk it out a step at a time. We wait for the next prompt. That's so much cleaner. That's so much easier. The place where we get into trouble is when we believe we can pull it off. And so then we jump in and we're in there and we're flat face planting in a way that's just a mess. Well, now I'm getting my faith torn up. I'm getting my faith shredded and shattered as I'm going forward. You talk about something that will result in anxiety, have a shattered, shredded faith. Now you look forward, especially maybe even at the same thing, and you're like, no, I did a face plant. I'm not doing that again. There's no way.
Getting to walk through what God did with you through training cases was such a gift, Kimberly, watching how every step of the way you would take it to him in that partnership, in prayer. Here's what, every morning going to him, sitting down and asking, what should I do next? And he really did guide you every step of the way down to the tiniest little detail, and then providing every step of the way as well. He'd show you something and then he'd say, and here's how you're going to get it. And then I'd show you something, here's how you're going to get it. So what I was thinking about, Pastor, and what you're talking about is like a kid, the way that sometimes I feel like I've treated God is like a kid getting the car, like, thanks, Dad, for the keys. And then I'm out the door. And and I'm off and running with it. So he gives me, people are really fond of saying that we get a download, that he gives me this inspiration. He gives me this vision, and then I just take the keys and I just grab it and go. And Dad doesn't hear from me again until I put the car through the wall and or the tires busted on the side of the road and I need help. And do we have AAA or what? And and so so I appreciate this idea because it is such a different approach to God, this idea of partnership. And what I've been thinking about the whole time is Moses, and about, he gave Moses that staff, and when they needed water, he told him exactly what to do. Tap this rock twice, water comes out. But then what did Moses do the next time? Oh, I know how to do this. I got this. And so he hits it. He hits it 3 times. And he got in trouble. He got in big trouble for doing that. And so I see how I'll grab the keys from God and then find myself on the side of the road with a flat tire going, how on earth? But God, you told me, you gave me the keys, Dad. Well, you didn't ask me, but I would have told you if you had come to me this morning that the tire pressure was a little low and maybe you needed to go get the tires checked or fill them up with air, or, so this idea of going to Dad every morning and saying, hey, Dad, is the car safe to take out today? Is there a certain route I should take? He's watched the traffic reports. Hey, is there bad traffic coming? Is there bad weather coming? Would there be a safer route for me to take? Is it time for an oil change? All these kind of things. He has all of that. He has all of that information ready to give us. He wants to give it to us in real time in that partnership thing. And that is it's kind of hard to wrap my brain around that the king, the creator and king of the universe, wants to be that for me in my daily life. That, talk about awesome, awesome. It's almost too good to believe.
When you're talking, I was thinking about last summer. We were driving through Ohio, and at a particular point, we knew it was going to be a long day anyway. It was about a 13, 14-hour day of being on the road. And so at one point, I'm watching the ETA, you're sitting there watching that. And at one point, it's kind of like, okay, arrival at, I think, 1 a.m. or whatever. I mean, we were getting in really late. Actually, I think it was probably midnight at that point. And as I'm watching, every few moments I'm checking, it's kind of like it was adding 15 minutes. So it's like, and so it's kind of like, what is going on here? What's wrong with my GPS? What's going on with this thing? Well, of course, there was a bad accident up ahead. And so 15 minutes, 30 minutes, I mean, next thing you know, everything's being added to that time frame. And I think that goes back to what you're talking about. So much of the time, we're not there. We're jumping in. We're operating according to the way that we know, according to the way that we think is best. And if instead we can back up and we really are consulting God, that's when we get, again, a God who intervenes. And I had some people posting on things that I'd written, that would just, again, almost in a very negative tone with this idea, there's a lack of faith in our culture of a God who intervenes. So if I don't do it, who will? And I'm going to kind of come back and say, if you do it apart from God, God won't. So that's an interesting. A lot of times when I'm dealing with trust, I say, okay, if you trust the wrong people, you can have bad outcomes. You trust the right people, you can get some good outcomes. But here's the deal. If you trust yourself, I know the outcomes will automatically be bad because of your blind spots. So if you trust no one, I know the guaranteed outcome. Same thing here. If the only one that I'm going to trust is myself, I know the guaranteed outcomes. Now, if I step back and I begin to say, you know what, maybe I ought to humble myself, get into partnership, trust God, work through this, then the intervention of God begins. But I'm going to go back to all things work by spiritual authority. If I give him 1% of 1%, so to speak, whatever, 0.0, however you want to do that, I'm not going to get the same results. In fact, I may not get much of any results as if I'm all in. And so this whole thing of partnership and inviting God in and getting God to speak in a way that there's a real change in my existence. And if I'm not seeing real-time change on a regular basis, I'm going to suggest you go back and let's kind of rebuild this relationship with God. Let's get it to where it's real-time right now, here, today, being led by God, partnering with God. Because if you don't have a reality base, how in the world are you ever going to overcome your anxiety?
And going back, I like the car analogy. I always like Heather's analogies that she gets and the way she describes. I think it's simple and it's easy for people to understand. And so I was thinking when you said that, have you ever been at a car zone, where they're doing road work and they have all the signs along the way that say, slow down, do not pass. And you'll always inevitably see these people that are just whipping, even where it says 50 and they're going like 90 and we're all in a stop lane. And I'm always thinking, what do they think is going to happen when they get up there? Well, they get up there and they have to stop and sit and wait unless somebody in this lane will let them in. And so a lot of them end up sitting longer waiting there because people are irritated that they sped up. But that makes me think of that, like how many times have we tried to just whip around, everything that God probably has for us in that waiting line while we're waiting, and we still get stopped because God's not going to allow it to happen until he's ready to do it, And then your comment made me think of a dear church that I loved and a dear sister coming to me and being very frustrated several years ago about all these programs that weren't happening. And the church was pretty much almost dead with only very few members. I mean, very few. And it just kept dwindling and dwindling. And they were trying to keep all the same programs going. And it was just overwhelming the few members that were there. And she was one of them. And she came, she said, I don't know what to do. And now they want me to do this. And now I need to do this. And now I need to do this. And I said, why? Well, if I don't do it, no one will. And I said, well, then maybe that program isn't supposed to be there right now. Maybe it's a whole refresh, starting over, and it goes down to nothing, and you all call on God until he sends the right timing for the programs. And so she didn't do that position. She was already doing like 10 of the positions, and it wasn't going to work. And now that church has literally grown. And there are great changes that have happened. So, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Actually, this
cool.
is kind of a total jump, but you have mentioned a couple times, I believe the language was training cases.
Yes.
You kind of threw that out there. You want to explain to the listeners a little bit what that means or not?
Sure. Part of the process that God took me through in that season of where I had to be still and quiet, between where he gave me the vision, there was a huge training process for me, where he brought me out of a lot of things that I had been through in my life and healed me. And I learned through that process the training of trusting him, acknowledging him, that this intimate relationship, not religion. And so what the classes that we're doing now are called Training Cases Escape from Trauma. And that is what we had been doing. Heather had been helping me with it. I prayed the last 3 days before the new year and feel like he's giving me a little more direction on that. Not sure that it's going to be escape from trauma now. I believe he's leading me towards rescue and escape from fear. And so we'll see if, where that's going to go. And I actually wrote a book about training cases, not escape from trauma, but that's the book he gave me that I literally wrote that describes that time frame of what he did in my life. while I was waiting.
So some teaching training materials that you're
Yes.
putting together for others, just
Yes.
lessons you've learned from
Yes.
your life that you want to be able to share with
Yes.
others.
Yeah.
Well, that's
It's
pretty
great.
neat.
And it's for women right now. But my prayer request is that, and God knows this, and He's already given me a vision for it. I've written it down, that it would also be opened up for men.
You think men might need that too?
Yes.
You think?
Yes.
I think that's a pretty universal topic.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, if you're watching, check out our website, livefreeministries.com, or, pick up on Heart Change You as well. Heather, did you want to say something or not? You acted like you did. Okay.
Oh, well, just along that line. Yeah, Heart Change You. It's a U for like university, heartchangeyou.com. Just this morning, we went live with our Overcoming Anxiety course. There are some other classes on there if you're interested in what we do and what we talk about in Live Free Ministries, starting with the 7 laws. There's also a spiritual diagnostics course on there for people, especially people who are in ministry or in counseling, who really want to go deeper with people. That's on there. So, yeah, heartchangeyou.com. Check it out. And if you're local and you're in McPherson, we would love to have you join us this Saturday, or anywhere around central Kansas. We'd love to have you join us this Saturday at the Omega Project in McPherson for our first one-day retreat on overcoming anxiety.
Better in one day, overcoming anxiety. It'll start at 9 o'clock, go through 3. There's a $25 suggested donation. Again, we don't want money to keep them away, but if you're able to come, we encourage you to come. If you can RSVP, that would be helpful in terms of knowing how much material to print and et cetera. So we look forward, hopefully, maybe to connecting with some of you on Saturday. There will be several more of these, yes.
I may have missed a question. Is it here?
It's here.
Okay. All right.
It's here, 201 South Chestnut. So it is right here. We're holding it here. Hopefully we don't get overwhelmed. I actually had pulled a secondary location in case the numbers were too large, and it's going to be a good group. So we'll see where we end up with all of that. But we're looking forward to that. And so all of the things that we do, they integrate, they work together. You've got the retreats that are available. We actually have another one on knowing the voice of God that comes up in February. You can check that out on the website. Obviously, you got all the video materials here on the YouTube channel, on Facebook. You can access different things, and so you can pick us up at different platforms. And so, but we thank you for joining us. Pass it on. We look forward to seeing you next week on Heart Change You.
All right.